doing this. We'll see how this goes. But last week we talked about the European explorations. Here you see all these explorers that are going in and finding their way around the Americas, this new world for them. And so when you see that first you have explorers, then they're going to start to send conquerors out. This is what we're going to be talking about today, is the conquerors. After they go in and conquer, they're going to send missionaries to try to convert to the religion, because like we talked about before, the 3 Gs, one of those is God, right? They wanted to convert to spread Christianity. Okay? They're going to start to send permanent settlers, and when they send permanent settlers, you have this turning into an official colony. So this is a colony is where you have a territory that is part of a European country that is not right next to the country. So you kind of see one of the earliest colonies in the fort that they build to house their permanent settlers. Okay? And here you can kind of see some of the colonies that are created in the Americas. So this blue territory is France, the orange territory is Great Britain, the green is Spain, and the tan down here is Brazil. And so Europeans are starting to take over. They also have some colonies that they're starting to take over in Africa, some cities in India, the Indonesia, the Philippines over here. So we're starting to see more and more colonization. Now today we're mostly going to talk about colonization in the New World, in the Americas. Okay? And they call it the New World because it was completely new. They had just discovered it after Christopher Columbus. Okay? So I'm going to be using this word a lot. Native, somebody who's originally from the territory. Europeans were not natives in the Americas because they were not from there. Okay? Whereas Native Americans or Indians, they were the natives. The Aztecs, the Incas, they were the natives. Okay? So Montezuma is king of the Aztecs. We're going to be talking about him in just a little bit. Atahualpa is king of the Incas. Okay? And we can think back to our last unit about the Aztecs and the Incas. You know, a lot of human sacrifice, the growing crops on chinampas. Here is the capital of the Aztec. It was quite an advanced civilization, and so conquering them was not necessarily going to be easy. Okay? Now, the Spanish conquerors that came to the Americas wanting to take over called a conquistador. Okay? And we're going to talk about 2 main conquistadors today. The first one is Hernan Cortez. So he is from Spain, and he comes to the New World with 508 soldiers. Not that many, considering there were millions of Aztecs at the time. And he was originally welcomed as a god. Okay, the Aztecs had never seen people sailing on such large ships. They had very, white skin, pale skin compared to the natives. They had guns, which are this kind of like stick that made this loud noise, could kill people at a distance. They had horses, which they had never seen animals that big that people could ride. And so all these things made the Aztecs originally think that the Europeans are a god. And so they brought sacrifices to them. They welcomed them into the city. But eventually, Hernan Cortez captured Montezuma and was trying to take over. That's how they were going to take over, is to capture him. But Montezuma and his soldiers, actually, they drove the Spanish out of the city, and they almost killed all the Spanish. But the Spanish were able to escape before they could be killed. And after this, Cortez knew that his men were scared. And so what they did, he actually made his soldiers burn the ships that they came on. They said, we're going to conquer this place. There's no turning back. You have to burn the ships. And the only way to survive here is to be able to conquer the Aztecs. And so the way they did that is the 2 ways, mostly. Diseases. Okay, as European diseases started spreading through the Aztecs, it weakened. So smallpox, measles, the flu spread rapidly among Native Americans who did not have immunity built up to these diseases. And so that killed off a pretty good population. But also they used divide and conquer. So the Hernan Cortez went to the tribes that surrounded the Aztecs, who often didn't like the Aztecs because, one, the Aztecs made them pay a lot of tribute, and they also captured people to do human sacrifices. And so they oftentimes allied with Cortez. Here you can see some native populations meeting with Cortez, and they sort of allied with him to try to get rid of the Aztecs. And with those native tribes, they actually went in and conquered the city. Here you can kind of see them moving into Tenochtitlan, trying to take over. And the Aztecs, with 508 people and their surrounding tribes, are actually able to defeat the Aztecs and take over. Francisco Pizarro is going to do something very similar in South America with the Inca. So he comes with 180 men, much fewer than Cortez has. And he is going to get in to try to take over Atahualpa. Now, Atahualpa was in conflict with his brother, right? So they had a rivalry to see who would control the Incan Empire. So Pizarro decides to meet with Atahualpa, just like he did with, just like Cortez did with Montezuma, and they capture him. Although this time the capture is a little bit more successful. Okay, so the Inca bring Pizarro 24 tons of gold and try to pay to ransom Atahualpa back, and so they get 24 tons of gold, and now Pizarro's like, oh crap, the Incas have a ton of resources that we could use, especially gold. And so what they do is they put the king on trial, and they actually strangle him to death as a penalty of execution. And Francisco Pizarro is going to be in control of the Incan people. Okay? So in Central America, you see all this Spanish territory, right? These Spanish conquistadors are taking a lot of territory. But also the Portuguese are going to have some territory. The Dutch and the French have a few territories too. In North America, it's going to be mainly the English, which is in pink here, the French, which is in green, and then, of course, you got the Spanish up there as well. Okay. Now, there is going to be fighting over this territory. Okay. So, eventually, the fighting between Spain and Portugal is going to lead to an agreement called the Treaty of Tordesillas, where they sort of draw this line down through their land and say, all right, everything on one side Spain gets, everything on the other side Portugal gets. Problem is their maps weren't very accurate, and they didn't follow this perfectly. As you can see, Portuguese is on the other side of the line. But this did reduce a lot of the fighting between Spain and Portugal. There is a war between the French and British in North America called the 7 Years' War. The French and Indian War is what the British actually called it, because they were fighting the French and Indians who allied with the French. And this is fought over colonial territory. This is also what's going to lead to the American Revolution. So the taxes that are used to pay for this war will directly influence the American Revolution. That's in the next unit. Now, the Spanish, when they took over, they used the Incan idea of mita. This is this is where the king believed to own the land, and everybody had to work for him for a portion of the year. So when Pizarro took over, he just adopted this, and the Spanish started using it to make the natives work for them for a portion of the year, and they started using that more and more time, forcing them to work. And this is how they got free labor. And it was, a lot of ways they were trying to get cash crops, so they were trying to grow crops they could sell, like sugar, tobacco, tea. They were also mining for gold and silver. Potosi was one of the largest silver mines in the world at the time. This is going to change. Most of the global currency is going to come from this mine in a Spanish colony. And also guano, kind of interesting thing, is bat poop. They were going in and digging poop out of caves from bats because they were using it as fertilizer to grow crops. Now, they use mita as labor, but they also are going to use indentured servitude, especially the English in North America are going to use indentured servitude. So this is where somebody who is in debt, maybe to pay off a debt, they would sign an agreement, say, oh, I'll work for a certain number of years. Or maybe you want to get to the New World because you want to have some land for your own. You're poor, and if you think you can get some land for your own in the New World, then you'll be able to make it just fine. But you can't pay for the trip to the New World. So people would sign themselves into indentured servitude, normally for 7 years, but it varied. They'd sign this contract that you see over here, and you'd have to work off the debt that you owed. And so that was one other form of labor that people were using. And most of the people in colonies worked on something called a plantation. Okay, this is a large farm. It was owned by a European. And they would use slave labor, they'd use forced labor, they'd use indentured servitude. They're going to mostly do this to grow cash crops. Okay, they want to. These are crops grown to sell rather than to survive. So you're not growing food, so to speak. You're growing sugar or tobacco to smoke, cotton to make clothes, tea to drink. These are all non-essentials, but they were very popular in Europe, so they could make a lot of money. And here you can see this painting of labor that was done in the Americas. Here you see people cutting down timber. Here you can see these guys are pulling a plow rather than using animals to do it. That's how invaluable the native labor was. Here they are mining. And you can see all kinds of other stuff going on, like this guy's eyes being put out for probably disobeying them. This guy is being forced to convert to Christianity. Now, when the Spanish took over, they started something called the encomienda system. Now, the idea behind the encomienda system is that Spanish settlers were supposed to protect the Native Americans, they were supposed to care for them, and they were supposed to Christianize them. They were supposed to spread Christianity. And in return, the Native Americans were supposed to work a portion of their time for the Spanish settlers. And so this is what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be this relationship between Europeans and natives. But what it really turned out to be was something completely different. The natives were, the effects of this were that the natives were pretty brutally treated. Here you kind of see a European beating a native that's not working hard enough. And you also see a hierarchy develop. The first hierarchy that's based on race. And it's going to start by the encomienda system. And basically, this hierarchy on the encomienda system, you have at the top peninsulares, who are people that are born in Spain. Okay, the Creoles were people who had Spanish parents, people that were born in Spain, but they were born in the Americas. Okay, where it says born in New Spain, that means they're born in the Americas, the New World. Okay, mestizos are a mixture of native, have a native parent and a European parent, probably had a European father and a native mother. Okay? And then you have Native Americans underneath them, and then enslaved people that are probably Africans that are brought over. And so when we get to this bottom part, we need to talk about why Europeans started bringing Africans to work. Okay? Here you can kind of see a picture of Native Americans being having their limbs cut off for not working hard enough for Europeans, so part of that brutal treatment. Okay. Now, a lot of the Native Americans, the problem with using them as labor is they were dying off from disease. So smallpox, measles, flu, it was killing them. The population, some estimates are as high as 90% of Native Americans died from these diseases. And then also there were not enough indentured servants to do all that work. So Europeans needed to find a new source of labor. And so what they did was they started to go to Africa. And they could buy slaves in the beginning. So the Portuguese were the first people to start doing this, but eventually other Europeans would do it too. And the first slaves were going to be bought from African kings, right? They were criminals, they were debtors, they were prisoners of war. And African kings would sell these to Europeans to get goods, to get supplies, to get manufactured goods like guns so they could win in wars. And so the original slaves were bought from African kings, but eventually Europeans just started taking their own slaves. It was cheaper just to take them rather than to buy them. And so eventually innocent people began to be captured. And most of the Africans are going to be sent to the Americas, to the West Indies, which is the Caribbean, or Brazil, because the Portuguese started it. The Portuguese colony in Brazil was going to get a lot of African slaves. And so they're going to start to use these slaves as labor. Now, we're going to talk more about the slavery in the next lesson.